Andy, did you ever imagine in 2021 you'd see online learning truly come of age?
I would say that it was pretty dodgy at first with all of the negativity that was conjured up around what was happening around emergency teaching in a remote sort of approach. But there has been some maturation around understanding the complexities and the preparation that's required. And I think Hannah, the work that you certainly were doing in Simcoe County, but also through the OELC in Ontario, has drawn some strong attention to, you know, the best of what it is. But I really, Robert, in that note, I'm very pleased to see that a lot of jurisdictions are looking at now online, or e-learning as we like to call it in CANeLearn, as a support for and a potential option for. So the benefits have been known for for students that have trouble in that social setting in school, have always been there and not widely known, but are now more broadly known because of the attention to it. Although there still are some serious challenges in really ineffective pedagogy that's still going on at this time.
Right. So here's a question I'm going to pose to the panel and yourself as well. So we're preaching to the converted, right? This is a national crisis that we basically are still in. EdTech, online learning got a very bad rap, right? How do we, on a national scale, I'm quite surprised, frankly, that the council ministers didn't step up to do something. Research, that the data on a national scale, to my knowledge, doesn't really exist. From an authority like a council of ministers. We put out that report that I shared. We're doing our part. We're all collectively doing our parts. But how do we overcome the stigma? Because this year, EdTech companies are going to suffer dramatically after last year, because we're seeing it happen already, that there isn't the same uptake and usage, obviously, due to in-class, but there still is that resistance to tactile learning, etc. So who wants to take on that challenge?
I'm wondering, Paul, I'm gonna prompt you as well. Paul Bennett may have some opinions to offer in here.
Is Paul on the line? Oh, I always enjoy our conversations.
But first to the panel.
Dean Sharesky.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to do is to continue to highlight the successes. And, you know, Chris talked about the fact that while they don't necessarily have explicitly online learning in one sense, they do in the sense that every classroom is blended. Every classroom experiences this in some way. And I think we're always, everything is always binary, right? It's either all this or all that. And that's such a narrow way to look at it. So I think we just need to do a better job of helping people understand and see that they're already experiences. This is already working. This is not something we have to, let's try and see. It is working. And right. And I just don't, I think there, you know, and I loved what you said at the beginning, Robert, about education being sort of the next vaccine, if you will, around that we need to focus on it. And we just, you know, again, those of us who are in this work get frustrated, right? Because we have high goals and high standards. And I just think sometimes we got to pull back and say, you know what, but we have actually accomplished a lot. But people don't completely understand the successes that we've had. And so continuing to help people see them, you know, the good news is that many of professionals around the world have experienced this and have decided, hey, maybe working from home 2 days a week is maybe the way that I want to move forward. So there's an appetite in the working world. There's also success in schools that I think we could just do a better job of showcasing and highlighting.
Thank you for that. Chris Kennedy, can you chime in on this one, please? You have a national lens through your involvement with the CEA and C21 Canada, CO Academy, ERDI. You bring a lot of insight.
Robert, I guess I'm a little more optimistic than you are about where we're at. Like, you know,
okay.
I think I come back to the fact that we have people that are far better skilled in terms of the technical skills. And that was such a huge barrier for us. Everyone had to ramp up the technical skills. Now is our job to match the technical skills that everybody's gained in the last 18 months with sort of the learning pedagogical pieces that are so important. Like I think, it absolutely is a crucial year this year. But I guess I'm a little more optimistic that at the end of this school year, blended learning and digitally enhanced learning and all those terms we use are actually going to be seen quite positively, and that that we won't have been set back like I'm feeling some on the call think we have.
Thank you for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally optimistic about the future. I'm just basing it on the information that I take in and the media reports, the negativity that's out there. If I had $1 for every time I heard shit show, pardon the language, I'd be very comfortable. So that, it's a regional thing, right? What you've achieved out west doesn't compare in other regions. So what I'm talking about is how do we on a national scale take those successful practices and the learnings, and we require more research. And Randy, perhaps this is something that you're going to continue to drill down on and to tell a story nationally so that we can keep everyone focused on not snapping back, because that's what early reports I'm getting is that things are going backwards in some regions, not all regions. It's about leadership. And Chris, you are exceptional in your leadership as a superintendent in Canada. You have different challenges than superintendents in other regions. The innovation curve varies across the country dramatically. And I think we can all agree on that there are pockets of innovation. For the first time in Ontario, there was talk about one-to-one computing being a reality. And it happened for the most part last year. What happened in some districts? They took back thousands of computers. They literally took back thousands of computers from kids that weren't going to get them back. So I'm not sure how that's going to, we're raising funds for kids that we're having an event on Monday for kids who don't have internet access at home, can't afford it. So there still are those many challenges that exist. So Todd, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there were two things that were happening that cast such a horrible light on e-learning, and it was almost the perfect storm, right? It was for the emergency response, the COVID-induced teaching and learning online, which was fully knee-jerk reaction. People basically doing the best that they could. Certainly it unveiled some of the weaknesses in the system, but at the same time, come on, let's give teachers a break. They're just going from, a career of teaching face-to-face and now saying, okay, you're going to migrate immediately. And even though we had the advantages here in Ontario, having a provincial LMS, having telecontacts, having the consortia or whatnot, it's still a very lofty goal to have them to be able to do that immediately and successfully. Now we've gotten a lot better at it. And that's where, you talked about the pockets of innovation, and we focus on that a great deal in our organization, and that's something that we try and promote. But the other thing in Ontario is the media, and Randy had already alluded to this, and thank goodness for the work of Randy and Michael Barber in terms of battling all of the, as Hannah was saying even earlier, so a lot of the misconceptions and myths around online learning. But because that's what sells in media, right? When the Ford government came out and said, we're going to have 4 mandatory online learning courses. So if you want to graduate in Ontario, then you need to complete 4 of your courses online. Of course, they walked that back to 2, and now that's still, we haven't heard a great deal of it as of late because it's never formally received, approval or been presented for approval in the legislature. So, so the immediate response to that then is, are people going to be buying newspapers if they're saying, oh, well, that's a great idea? online learning. So they're looking wherever they possibly can to find any type of negative research, vignettes, personal stories, whatever, about e-learning. And so that's what, overtook the media. And then, thank goodness for CANeLearn's involvement in battling a lot of that very publicly. And it was a very stressful time for all of us who've been working very hard over the years to build what we've built in our various systems.
Thank you for that. And I think the storytelling needs to continue, right? And sharing those success stories that emerged out of the pandemic. And that's part of the inspiration around C21 in our document. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton back over to Randy. In the interest of time, I don't know if we want to field any questions that might be in the chat.
I think this is a good time to continue sort of the conversation, and we'll come back to Rob and Aaron afterwards. I think, Paul, you questioning some things I think that are really important to it. To get back to the voice, this is directly what the CANeLearn, our board, met in July and said, we need to be more active as a voice in this medium, in this discussion, and also bring good practices forward so that people understand what it is, and sharing across the country. I mean, that's what we formed and back in 2014. When we did this in order to bring a richness to the online learning conversation and to have more people involved in it. But I agree, Paul, with the concerns about code language jargon. They conjure up different meanings and different things, and being very explicit in describing what we do. But to me, and Peter posted a comment as well about personalization, differentiation, and inclusion. And I go back to, and I really love Tony Bates, is he talks about the affordances of certain environments. And I think as teachers, we have to take advantage of all of our environments. When I was teaching earth science, I got those kids outside and we dug into a stream. There are different ways and means that we can do that, but a good teacher with even a chalkboard can have some robust learning that can go on. But we now have affordances of different environments and mobility, which is really, I think, we need to take advantage of and keep the conversation more directly in there. The politics of both social and the news media, combined with decisions that are made by politicians. I mean, I can say, sorry, I will make this comment. The provinces that had the least disruptions were the ones that let the healthcare professionals dictate what happens. Those that had the most disruptions had the politics of the moment be there. And as we well know, just as we in Canada, for those of we've got some British folks that are here, we just went through a national election again federally. And we know that how divisive and how simplistic it takes a very complex set of economics and health regulations, etc., and crystallizes them into 20-second sound bites. And that's, I think, the biggest issue that we face in education, but also not letting political decisions drive and dictate. We need to get the pedagogy and the teachers and move that conversation forward and talk about affordances of different environments and not put a label on it if we can avoid it.
Fascinating. Shall we let Mr. Bennett chime in? Hi, Paul. Good to see you virtually.
I'm just really here as an observer. I feel myself to be a guest because I just saw the opportunity via social media to join you. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be part of this discussion. So you have that to thank for the pandemic. It's now on Zoom and virtually anyone can join. So the Education Summit has guests of all types. I mean, that's a side joke. Randy will get that. And I'm very, very convinced, as Randy knows, that when Michael Barber weighed in to the debate back in March and April of 2020, it was a huge step forward, making that differentiation between emergency online or emergency learning in a home learning situation and trying to separate that from well-planned and executed online learning. But I sense today that it hasn't been entirely successful, because out there in the broader world, there's this muddling of the two concepts. And I think it's because teachers were thrown into, as we all know, an impossible situation without the resources. And in spite of all the good work that's been going on for the last decade or more, it's surprising how little they had to work with. So all these school boards that have been spending a lot of money on technology, I guess they should be asking questions about, where did it go? And I have the temerity to suggest that as a possible question today. But the truth of the matter is, everyone was thrown into disarray, including consultants, I'm told. Right, Dean? Having to work at home and not having access to people in the flesh is a challenge for everyone. But getting back to the point, I really enjoyed the presentation on Quebec. I thought it was real. Because I'm out there covering every province and territory, writing articles, writing op-eds, writing books. And what I saw was what you heard about Quebec. I was surprised it wasn't the same everywhere else. And I want to thank Mr. CANeLearn. Thanks for being real today, because we've been through an awful maelstrom. And I was only thinking, what if Irvin Studden was to get into this conversation? He believes that we're in the midst of an educational catastrophe. And, no wonder people are grasping at straws, trying to find some silver linings. I think he's grossly exaggerating what's gone on, but maybe we should put that on the table. What do you think of the 21st century questions analysis? And the fact that the education system really did not measure up as a result of the pandemic, in fact, probably broke down and didn't perform well at all.
Who wants to chime in and
Certainly food for thought as always, Paul. And yes, Michael Barber did jump in briefly. He was here for a couple of minutes. I don't know whether anyone noticed, but I'm wondering, Peter or Trevor, across the pond in the UK, I mean, you're hearing us talk about what's happening in Canada, and I noticed the text before that there were similar parallels that you were experiencing as well.
Yes, I'll jump in on that. Thank you. It's been a really interesting session to listen to you all talking. And I think you should congratulate yourselves, because you're actually thinking about the bigger picture a lot more than the UK is. Our Department for Education is really burying its head in the sand a little bit. But there are one or two bright spots. We like to think we're one of them. We're a technology company that's doing a little bit of what you're doing in Ontario. Our model is that schools should connect, should be able to share technology, should be able to share teaching and information, and share CPD. So we're moving down that route, and we're finding a similar resistance as you are to individual teachers thinking that technology is something foreign to the classroom, thinking that it's something they shouldn't be using. But we're also finding those early adopters who are really interested in stretching the boundaries. I think where we're slightly different is that we're looking at it from the point of view of the individual teacher taking the lead. So rather than a course, we've made a technology where the teacher can make a video for one child, make it in a couple of minutes, upload it, send it straight out there. And that's working really well, that personalization and differentiation. And we're also keen to see the technology work in the classroom. So a teacher can send some videos home to those children who are struggling so that they can learn early, so that when they come into the classroom, they're up to date. And similarly, you can set videos aside for those children who are successful in the classroom and can work further ahead on their own, which leaves the teacher to have more success in the classroom by being able to move around and work with different groups. So that was my question about personalization and differentiation, because coursework as such doesn't seem to address some of the problems we're seeing in the classroom. And I think the other interesting thing that I picked up in your conversation was you talked about some children finding blended learning really helpful. That's what we're noticing too. We're finding that some of those children who are quieter in the classroom, some of those who perhaps don't speak up, are finding the ability to use asynchronous video really helpful and are actually coming on quite strongly in their education. So they're not being overshadowed by what's going on in the classroom, and they're taking time to learn themselves. So we're quite excited about next year. And I'm also excited to be talking to you all in Canada, because I think, you know, we have some things which fit with where you're going. And we would very much like to talk more.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
And maybe Trevor, you could put a link to your organization on your site in the chat.
Absolutely, I'm very happy to put that into the chat. And certainly the introduction I made to yourself, Randy, that this is exactly the content, the interaction that I was hoping for our UK companies that are part of this global business innovation program that Innovate UK are certainly running. And Peter, if I may, just hearing you talk there, I'm delighted that you're so engaged with this and you're actually getting so much out of it. And the conversation and the chat that's going on there is absolutely fantastic. Of course, I know Robert from very recent communications with him, and I was delighted to. I know we had a session with Robert yesterday, so the fact we see you twice in 1 week. Small world.
We're in good company.
It's absolutely fantastic, and certainly this. I know I have a few of my colleagues here involved in this, and what I'd be very interested to do, Randy, is afterwards is to have access perhaps to the video, if that's possible, because I know that
Absolutely.
Some of the other members of the group will find this very engaging and also very useful as well. And I've been taking notes as to some of the people that have been presenting here, because the content has been absolutely fantastic. So I will certainly in the chat I will pop over a link to some information about our companies that are engaging here, and if anybody has any if they want to reach out to those companies, the details are there just to speak with them. So thank you very much indeed for
thank you for that. One of the analogies used in the report that I shared was that technology was a super glue that kept education systems together this past year during the crisis, and that was Penny Milton, our senior writer, who came up with that concept.
So on that notion, Robert, I'm wondering if we could swing back to Rob and Aaron, who have also a different perspective, because not sitting in education necessarily, but helping support education. Because Peter, your comment about video, I think it was so important about the quality of and the instant ability to communicate directly with students through the use of video was one of the pieces I think that we take away from the past 2 years of our experiences. But the other one is how barely and so visible the inequities were. So equity in education is a very, very strong piece that rolls out. But Rob or Aaron, what did, in your journeys around and in discussions with a broad base of educators as well, what are some of your observations?
I can speak. I think it really forced us to sort of hone in on 3 key things about how our platform could support engagement, management, and communication. And those 3 things seem to be kind of distilled down to the major things that school districts or our partners were worried about. We onboarded into Canvas a record number of school boards and organizations across Canada and across the world. The demand on our own internal infrastructure was just crazy in terms of the amount of people that needed to be hired for support and for training. And it led us to launch things like our own Canvas certified educator program, as well as our virtual version of our Center for Learning Innovation, which helped to deliver increasing demand for PD for leadership. We saw our Free for Teacher offering explode across the country, particularly in BC and Ontario. And it was a really, really interesting year in terms of what we supported in terms of both implementation, training, and the need for school districts to get up to speed in a way that we haven't seen before, where a typical implementation might take 3 to 6 months. School districts were looking for a rollout between 6 to 8 weeks. So it was a major shift for us.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and I know that it's there are lots of challenges that have gone in with that scalability, and that's one of the things that we're used to instant gratification, and it's not really always happening. So, Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, the equity component on and the ability to access content. In some ways, we had seen a lot of flipped learning kind of have a version 2.0. Because of the forced nature of the remote learning. And so we had seen some elementary educators being able to do very simple things like read alouds and even some kind of home-based projects, STEM projects in the Bronx, in New York City, in a very mixed socioeconomic environment. And the fact that the content was being presented in some ways, the parents or the caregivers were kind of learning alongside of the students, because the video asset and what was being presented in the virtual classroom was accessible through a learning management system to their not only the student but also to the parents, and so that was really interesting. And I completely agree with the comments about the use cases for video can not only help support a struggling learner, but can further support a learner that wants to kind of take it further. And what we've seen now, for better or worse, is now we've got educators now have a catalog of a library of assets that they can return to and reuse, stored typically in their LMS, of course, and then use it to support what's going on in the classroom. So, yeah.
Great.
Randy,
Thanks.
can I jump back in?
Yeah.
One of the areas we've found to our surprise is deaf teaching. We've come across deaf teachers who are teaching in BSL, who are now using, or British Sign Language, who are now using video to teach secondary maths, which we've then translated into English with a voiceover and captions. And that's now being used in mainstream schools to help children who are in the school as a deaf child, but not getting strong support there. So we're using video in ways like that to support the outliers of education. And we've seen, again, huge parental engagement where that type of video is being used, but also things like water rituals and other support for children with profound and multiple learning difficulties, where the parents can now see what goes on in school and are able then to try those things at home with their children. And that's helping and being very impactful as well.
Interesting. Yes. And the beauty of what's happening with technology is it comes into our individual hands, that we don't need large complex organizations or support to do that. I know that Dean was using Open Broadcast Studio for his presentation, and that's open sourced and freely available, and it can be used. So that I use the captioning on YouTube. Because it's there and it's freely accessible for when some of my teaching as well. Anyone on the board, I don't want to interrupt the conversation and realize that we've got about another 30 minutes that was originally in the plan time, but the program agenda, I just want to flow with this because we have it going now. I don't want to disrupt it. So others to chime in with some of their thoughts in terms of, really, where are we going to turn this corner and what are we looking at? A year from now, when the dust maybe settles, but it should be settled in a year, according to the modeling in healthcare.
Well, I think another big part of all this too is the heightened awareness of the significance of social and emotional well-being. And I know Ontario was very, they had led the way in this in terms of making it explicitly part of their provincial work prior to the pandemic. So it was already on the front burners. And this is just, again, focused on that. And so when we think back to the kinds of pedagogies that we're trying to promote and recognize, is how are we fostering that in an online environment, and how do we continue to focus on the notion of relationships? Because at the end of the day, I mean, and this is something I've written about, I've talked about, is you don't need school to learn. Nobody needs school to learn. And if you disagree with that, then you're saying that prior to public education coming into existence, people were idiots, and that's not true. People learned lots of things before. So then again, then the question becomes, why school? What is the purpose of school? And my argument, and again, I'm willing to engage in debate on this, is to build that community and connection as well as a learning experience. And so I think thinking about how these tools and how these affordances can not just provide an academic content skill-based experience, which it can and it does, and it's awesome. I mean, my wife right now is taking an online art course through University of Saskatchewan, and she said, this is so awesome because I can see exactly what the instructor's showing, and I'm learning these skills, and it's powerful. But when we're talking about children specifically, we've got to showcase the fact that we are paying attention to them as human beings and as learners, and are including ways in which we're connecting with them and building community as well. So it's not just this personalized contract between teacher and student, and the fact that there's other people in the room is irrelevant. That has to stop. The fact that there's other people in the room is a high priority, and that we have to figure out how we're going to learn with and from each other. Otherwise, let's just go back to a correspondence model where I'll just mail in the stuff and it's just a one-on-one. So that's always sort of my danger when it comes to personalization, which again, I'm not disagreeing that it's not important. I'm just saying that is what schools can be, is these rich community-based experiences. And so how does this continue to push that effort around social and emotional well-being and community?
Thank you for that, Dean. Randy passed the baton back to me. I subscribe to the notion that it takes a digital village to raise a child in the 21st century. And if you talk to Dr. Mario Chason from Franklin Sud School District in New Brunswick, his notion is that the community is a school. And so the four walls that existed in the past, thanks to innovation, thanks to the evolution of where we're at, we have a university student here today doing work integrated learning. And the challenge is that we need the research and the evidence that will help drive the future of where we go with public education. When I look at the school to home connection and the broadening of the community, phenomenal successes in drawing in parents and bringing them more into the equation, and the relationships that were forged online with kids who were previously not comfortable in the classroom. We've seen many great examples of and personalization, and the flipped classroom was referenced. So we have great examples that we need to continue to share and inspire. But the well-being piece, Dean, that's part of our report that we just released. Well-being has been at a crisis this past year. Does anyone want to weigh in and talk about the importance of the support mechanisms for students to thrive that may exist or may not exist in some regions, because it's not happening systemically across the country. You alluded to Ontario, but that's a priority area that we see, and some regions are really honed in on that.
I can jump in for a second. Just wanted to mention further to what you were saying, Robert, about schools as a community. We've been managing 90 community learning centers in our community here in English Quebec. We invite the community into our school. We get our students and our teachers out of the schools and into the community to really start to understand that they shouldn't be bounded by four walls. It remains a challenge, and I guess that's really the point that I want to come to, is that as I listen to everyone speak, I hear about many great examples, things happening that are exemplary, and really worth trying to replicate and introduce everywhere else. My fear, and what I see constantly, is that these are like fireworks. They're beautiful and they're fantastic and they're great to be a part of and to see, to experience. However, they're far too dependent on individuals. They're be they school leaders, district leaders, teachers, whomever. They're far too dependent very often on teachers. Oh, sorry about that. And as a result, when the teachers move on, or the administrators move on, a lot of these great initiatives, these great exemplars pass on and disappear. And what we also see is that even at our own meetings and what we're doing, we have 15 to 20% of our educational community that's listening to us, and we just have a tough time going beyond that 15 to 20% engagement level. Take a look at all your television reports on what's happening in the classrooms, and when they show you classrooms, they show you classrooms with desks pointing to the front. Didactic models, so they're still prevalent everywhere. I even did a little presentation, I'm sorry to be lengthy here, but did a presentation to teachers of Français Langue Seconde. I asked them if their desks were pointing to the front in their classrooms. They all giggled and laughed and said, yeah, and they put their hands up, and I said, what kind of teaching does it lead to? And they said, une approche magistrale, didactic learning. I said, okay, fine. What do you know about didactic or learning? This was the least efficient way of doing things. And then I asked them, why do you continue to do this, even though you know that it's the least efficient? And of course, then they had a barrage of excuses, and that the curriculum forces us to do this, and so on and so forth. My fear, and I sound like a Debbie Downer here, is that we're having a tough time in education breaking through that 15 to 20% barrier, where we start to get a larger and more general uptake in what we're doing, and we have a lot of challenges in that area. So I don't suggest that we give up, but I think that we need to take a more systems approach to it. Peter Senge notion that let's get all the players involved. We can't count on one or two individuals. Parents, educators, administrators, the general public have to be involved in the whole process. So sorry for a long speech here.
Thank you for that, Michael. So my wife is city clerk in Mississauga. The pandemic hits, the emergency response team that has rehearsed over the years, systems in place, kicked in, didn't miss a beat. That's kind of the theme of our conference later in October, is the notion of future-proofing. Districts would future-proof their networks, the redundancy, but the system wasn't, because we weren't accustomed to hurricanes and other disasters, as some of other regions are. We're very fortunate that way. What are the implications for the future of education when it comes to the notion of future-proofing? Truly future-proofing.
Sorry, Robert, this is what I heard Chris saying. I mean, and Chris defied convention and was one of the few districts that did not embrace the online learning, or distributed learning, as it was called when BC offered that, open it up. I think we have to defy some of the conventions, but also what we're hearing from Hannah and Todd was about the future proofing, is just to have that fallback or engaged space so that you're not a one-trick pony, is what I'm hearing. And then take advantages of the affordances of one or the other in that as well. I don't know, Frank, if you have any thoughts on that notion, but I like the idea of future proofing, and I'm really looking forward to your event as well, because I think what I'm hearing folks say is, as what Dean described, the superintendents, they got together and they shared and helped each other through, but they did it from a practitioner leader's point of view, as opposed to a policy funding point of view, which we get trapped in with governments. Others
want to chime in?
If I could jump in for just a second, I think that one of the things that's interesting, and I'm speaking from a high school perspective, being that I formerly used to be in the online world as a director of an online school within Saskatchewan, but now I'm in a bricks and mortar. What I find so interesting, and particularly in Alberta, is how so many decisions were driven by pandemic as opposed to pedagogical motivation. And I think that's a challenge that I think we're facing, because as soon as we're forced to go to online, there we go, we're online again. And then, well, we don't want to go back to online. We want to do face-to-face. That's the best way. That's the only way. That's what you hear. And, and Chris has highlighted this as well. And so has Dean. It shouldn't be about that. It should be about what's best for kids. And unfortunately, that's not what's driving so many of our decisions that are happening at district level. It's based on, it's coming right down to, well, it's the necessary evil that we're taking and being forced into to take and do online. And I wish we could get past that and actually look at what's best for kids in terms of differentiation, inclusion, all these different elements that are important to take and consider when you're taking and looking at your pedagogy for kids. And that doesn't seem to come into the equation here. So that's the frustration that I see, is how quickly things revert back to the past and what was known, as opposed to taking and thinking about where we should be going with and what's better for kids.
Well said, Vincent. And I was going to comment that in our region, it was always the chief medical officer, not the pedagogical experts, that were consulted on or the psychologists, or, from a well-being, from a best practice and well-being perspective, that drove the decision-making during crisis learning. So I'm curious where other regions were different. I got to plug in. I'm using.
Yeah, it looks like he's having technical difficulties on that one now.
I'm back.
Yeah, okay.
Does anyone want to chime in on that?
If I could just pick up on Vincent's comment. We set out to put our service together because my colleague, the founder of the company, was a head teacher. And he had to turn around a school from a failing school to a successful school. And he did that by sending teachers out into other schools to see good teaching. And he completely turned around the standard of teaching in that school. He then decided that not every school could do that. So what he needed was technology. And where we started from was sharing best practice, showing teachers how good teachers were teaching. And that's still at the heart of what we do. So teachers in any school can go and look at teaching from other schools and see how they're doing it. So for the past 10 years, we've been working with schools and saying, how can technology support you? Rather than technology can do this, how can you use it? So our burning desire really is to make the technology support the teaching rather than the technology take over the teaching. So when you've talked about pedagogy, actually what we've tried to do is make a system where the teacher is in charge. The teacher can do what they need to do to support the children. And the technology supports them in accessing good teaching, skills they don't have, knowledge they don't have, and being able to channel it into that child. And I think where we've seen mental health come up as an issue, we've seen individual teachers creating those videos, sending them out to that child to support them. And we've got a deaf teacher doing some wonderful art therapy with her children and sending it out. That video will be there forever. And if people need to access it and use it again, they can. And the videos that are there about maths and English and other academic subjects are there for everyone to access. But also, as teachers work in new ways, the whole system is being updated all the time. So that future proofing is in there as well.
I'm wondering if I could ask Peter a question, and it's a British
Sure, go ahead.
question. What do you think of Daisy Christodoulou's Teachers versus Tech? I know Daisy very well, and I'd be interested in your view of her analysis of why teachers have resisted technology and why they continue to do so, and her constructive suggestions on how we might get over that.
I don't know that work, I'm sorry to say, so I can't comment on that directly, but I can only comment on our experience. And our experience is that it's surprisingly teachers who are non-tech who've taken up our particular service, because we've tried to keep the tech out of it. If you can make a video for Facebook, if you can make a video of your family at home, you can use our service. It's as simple as that. And we've made it as intuitive as possible because we recognize that people are overfaced by technology. And in fact, the teacher we now employ to help other teachers was someone who was coming to retirement, saw our service and said, oh my goodness, I wish I'd seen this at the beginning of my career rather than the end of my career. And can I please come and work for you? So we've seen real technophobes take this up.
The only reason I'm asking is that it deals directly with the issue you are presenting today. It's from Britain and it's published by the Oxford University Press. I reviewed it for the Literary Review of Canada.
Then I'm suitably chastised.
It's a hugely important book because it addresses some of the very issues we've been talking about today. For example, what is the pedagogy that's buried in the technology that turns teachers off? Is it the pedagogy that is informing the tools that is adding to, and could the technology embed different forms of technology or of pedagogy that is more, that teachers would be more receptive to? I think this is a huge issue that she's very, very effective in making that case.
And I'm going to jump in on that one, Paul, because I agree 100% with you. It's the values and philosophy that drove the development of the technology that you need to uncover in order to understand it. And if you can put a link to that book, I think that's a really important concept for many of us. For me, in terms of my engagement with, it's the people that surround the technology that make it attractive to me, because that's far more important, is how the technology can be applied and supported as opposed to what the tech does itself. So am I going to be a Google Apps for Education, or am I going to be Microsoft Teams? You know, it depends on who's supporting and what structures are there around that to make that decision, because technologies can kind of similarly do the same thing. You know, am I going to work with Zoom, or am I going to work with Google Meet, or am I going to do Teams? It depends on the people around and what's accessible to me. But the pedagogy, the philosophy behind the development of those things, that those tools are really, really important. I want to kind of swing around, Robert, if it's okay to.
Yeah, I was just going to, just before we close off, Randy, I was just going to comment that, and you raised a very good point, Paul, and, faculties of education have a role to play. It really, truly takes a digital village to raise a child. There's professional learning. There's a lot of moving parts, and then the agility, right? To be agile in your mindset and have that growth mindset. There are tremendous challenges ahead, but I'm optimistic that, through research, the tools that will emerge are the tools that make an impact on student learning. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton back to you, Randy. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate.
Oh, hey, thank you, Robert, for being here. I really appreciate that. And if you want to put a link into your event in October as well, that would be great.
Sure. Happy to do that.
Yeah, for us. And Paul, if you've got the reference to the book, that would be awesome if you could put that in as well.